thank you for being here at 7 o'clock on a Monday night. And I want to start with, before we get into the bulk of our content, of why I started doing these different webinar series. And so story time usually goes well. So here's a picture of me actually when I was 22 years old, in front of the very first house that I bought. And the reason I like to put this out there is, and that was my dog Lincoln. Unfortunately, Lincoln has not been with us for a very long time. So I bought my first house back when you could actually buy a house for $160,000. But what I think is important to know about that is at that time, I was making $32,000 a year. It was very difficult to buy that house. However, 4 years later, when I sold that house, I walked from the closing table with almost $40,000. And over the course of those 4 years, if I had stayed renting, there is no way I would have saved 40 grand. It just would not have happened. And that's why I'm so passionate about people buying versus renting. There's always a time and a place for renting, but over the long haul, it's usually always better to own. So tonight, some of the things we're going to cover, and it's basically everything you need to know to buy your first home. The first one is, why should you buy a home? How do you actually buy a home? Cash or with a mortgage? What kind of credit score is required to buy a home? What are closing costs and who pays them? What are the steps of buying a home? What does today's real estate market look like? What is the role of a realtor in all of this? And how does your realtor get paid? And then at the very end, I'll open it up for questions and answers. So the very first thing is, why should you buy a home? And, let's look here. Let's talk about buying versus renting. So when you own, you have a lot more stability than you do when you're renting. It gives you a lot more freedom than renting. You can paint the walls whatever color you want. You can make any kind of changes you want. Your dog has a backyard to run around in. They might not have when you're renting. You're building equity as you make that monthly mortgage payment, which is usually a fixed payment as well. You're building equity in the home and you're paying down part of the principal on that loan. It's an investment. Buying a home is an investment for your future, much like a retirement fund. Like the story I told you at the beginning, that money that I had when I sold that house, then I was able to roll into the next house I purchased or do whatever I want with it. When you're renting, there's a lack of stability. You can be forced to move at any time. You're at the mercy of the person that you're renting from, whether that be a landlord or a property manager. And while it might be cheaper on the front end, that's typically only for the short term. While renting seems cheaper at first, use the 5% rule and you can kind of see for yourself. Typically, rent goes up around 5% per year. So if you're paying $2,000 a month in rent right now, it's probably going to be around $2,100 next year and just continue to go up. There's also no long-term gains. There really aren't any investment opportunities while you're renting. And then the average net worth of a typical homeowner is about 40 times greater than that of a renter. So if you kind of see here, the average net worth of a renter from a national study is about $6,300, whereas the average net worth of a homeowner is around $250,000. That is a huge, huge gap. And another reason why I'm just so passionate about this. Let's go back to the story that I told you before. I would not have had that money that I had if I had rented over those 4 years. I would have had nothing really to show for that. And instead, I walked from there with 40 grand. I have another client that I always like to use as an example who he bought his first home. I think he came to me when he was like 19 years old. He was fresh off the boat right here in Hampton Roads in the military. and he was able to buy his first home, no money down. He came back to me 2 years later. He house hacked that house, which I will be doing another webinar this spring on what house hacking is and how you can do that if that fits your situation. And he actually moved out of that house a couple years later, was renting it out, turned it into an investment property, and bought another house. And he continued to do that. I think I've sold him 5 houses now, where basically about every 2 years he buys a new house. And he has built a tremendous amount of wealth, to the point that when he retires from the military, he has no plans to work anymore. He plans to just live off that residual income in his military retirement. So again, the first step is buying your first home. And then if you want to, get into real estate investment, owning an investment property, that's actually something I'm actually going to cover in my webinar next month. But it all starts with that first home purchase. Let's look at the average sales prices of houses in the US. You can see that, back 20 years ago, they were just north of $200,000. And now, this is again the average. So it takes into account, California and the northern United States, where homes are very expensive. But you can see now that has over doubled over the past 20 years. And the average appreciation over this time has been just north of 4.5%. So if you think about that, if you were paying $2,000 a month in rent over that time period, you're getting nothing in return for that. At least this way, you're getting a return. Let's talk about how you actually buy a house, cash or a mortgage. About 30% of home buyers buy in cash. So this means that about 70%, which I would even go so far as to say, I would say 95% of first-time buyers use a mortgage. So what is a mortgage? A mortgage is a security instrument that basically tells the bank that they can take this house if you don't make the payment. That's it in a nutshell. You're going to go to a lending institution, a loan officer, a bank, and you're going to get approved to buy a house. And then they're going to basically, the collateral for that loan, it's somewhat like buying a car, except instead of a title, it's a deed. But the collateral for that loan is the actual home. So there's multiple different types of loans. The most common loan out there is a conventional loan. And a conventional loan is a type of mortgage loan that's not insured or guaranteed by the government. This means that the lender, typically a bank or credit union, takes on the full risk of that loan. Conventional loans are not subject to the same strict eligibility requirements as government-backed loans, such as FHA loans and VA loans, but they generally have lower interest rates. An FHA loan is backed by the Federal Housing Administration, which is a part of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. You might have heard the term HUD before. They're designed to make homeownership more accessible, especially for first-time buyers and buyers with lower credit scores. FHA loans typically require a 3.5% down payment. Whereas on the previous slide, I talked about conventional loans. Those are typically between 5 and 20% or more down. A VA loan is an extremely popular loan here in our military market here. So it's backed by the Department of Veterans Affairs, and it's a mortgage program that's designed to assist eligible veterans, service members, and their surviving spouses in achieving home ownership. And because they back that loan, it offers lenders a level of security that allow for much more favorable terms for qualified borrowers. For instance, a VA loan is typically 0% down. There's also the VHA loan, which is the Virginia Housing Development Authority. They don't provide loans directly, but it offers a lot of home loan programs and initiatives to make homeownership more accessible for residents of Virginia. They work with approved lenders to offer loans and support affordable housing initiatives. So you probably heard that term before. These loans can be 100% financing. Now, The good news, there are some down payment assistance programs out there. These vary by location, and they could be offered by different organizations, including state housing authorities, local governments, and nonprofit entities. So this is something that it's really critical that you're working with a great lender who can help you explore all of the programs that you might qualify for. I want to go through a few of the most popular ones right now. There's the Homeward Norfolk program. We have helped several buyers work with this program. It's a really awesome program. And it provides up to $20,000 in down payment assistance and closing cost assistance to first-time buyers with household incomes between 80 and 120% of the area's median income, who are purchasing a home in Ingleside, Monticello Village, or Oakdale Farms communities in Norfolk. Then we've had one buyer, I think it was either last year or the year before, who used this program. Their income was under the 80% threshold of the area's median income, and they got a full $40,000 in down payment and closing cost assistance. So that is a really cool program for people buying in Norfolk if you qualify. Then there's the Come Home to Portsmouth program, and they provide up to $25,000 in closing cost assistance and or down payment assistance. I've had a couple people over the years that have used this program successfully to buy homes in Portsmouth. I talked about the VA loan before. That is 100% down program. Then we've got, or I'm sorry, it's 100% financing program so that you can do 0% down. And it can be combined with other down payment assistance program to get like you some closing cost assistance or something like that. Then we talked about the VHDA, and there's some additional closing cost assistance grants. And those are true gifts that require no repayment. So that's a great program, again, for somebody that qualifies. If you're buying a home way out in Suffolk, Franklin, or maybe going into North Carolina, then the USDA Rural Development Loan may be a loan that is available for you. And these are no down payment loans in eligible rural and suburban communities. They can also sometimes complement a USDA loan. Let's talk about what credit score is required to buy a home. So under a conventional loan, the minimum credit score is typically 620. FHA is 580, VA is 580, and then VHDA, Virginia Housing, is 620. What are the two most important things you can do for your credit score? Number one is never pay anything late. Do everything you can to pay all of your bills that report to the credit agencies on time. Don't be late on a credit card. Don't be late on a car payment. Anything that gets reported to the credit bureaus, I encourage people, pay those as early as you can without sacrificing paying another bill. That will really help your credit. Then the other thing is, don't max out your credit cards. A maxed out credit card will absolutely trash your credit score, almost as bad as a late payment will. Typically, lenders are looking to see that you're utilizing 29% or less of your available credit. So let's make numbers simple. Let's say you got a credit limit of $1,000. You want to try to never charge over $290 on that credit card. And they also like to see that you pay that on time and that sometimes you pay more than the minimum payment due, because that tells them that you know how to use your credit responsibly. Those two things right there will make the biggest difference in whether or not you can buy a home. Got another story for you. So I was working with a lovely couple a few years ago, and, unfortunately, they don't teach, finances in school, and they just didn't know what they didn't know. And, they weren't really organized with their finances, and they didn't pay their bills on time, and all of their credit cards were maxed out. Well, it took some time. I got them with a credit specialist, and we have access to a whole Rolodex of people like that we can introduce you to if that's your situation and something you need. But I got them linked up with an awesome credit repair specialist, There are vultures out there, so you have to be really careful with that and make sure you're dealing with somebody good. But they help them um, get a plan together, pay everything on time, and also to get those credit cards paid down to under that 30% threshold. It took, I think it was somewhere between 6 and 8 months. Their credit score went up over 100 points, and we went out shopping and they bought their very first home, and they're actually still living in that home today and could not be happier. So it's really, really important that, you kind of, take hold of your finances in that way. And there's amazing agencies out there. Again, you do have to be careful to not end up with a vulture, because there are people that prey on that. They charge all kinds of crazy fees and everything. There are also some really good people that really know what they're doing and can help you along the path to buying your first home. Let's talk about what closing costs are and who pays them. This is something that is really confusing and really daunting, especially when you're buying your first home. So these are the fees and expenses with finalizing a real estate transaction, getting it to the actual closing table so that you now own that home. So both buyers and sellers are going to incur cost, covering services like the loan origination, the appraisal fee, title insurance, etc. The responsibility of paying these costs, depends. Like if they're buyer cost, then either the buyer pays them, or we may be able to negotiate for the seller to help, pay those costs or offset some of them for you. And then obviously the seller's cost is always paid by the seller. So what's really important is that you kind of understand this, and that we make sure that you are either in a position to pay closing costs, or that you're working with somebody who can help guide you to homes that are more likely for you to be able to get those closing costs covered by the seller. Because, a home that's one day on the market that has 5 or 10 people interested in it, the seller is just not at that point going to be willing to help cover your closing costs. But if they've sat on that home for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month, they're probably going to be very amenable to doing what they can to help you get in that home. So let's talk about the actual steps to buying a home. What are they? So the very first thing you're going to need to do is choose a realtor to guide you through the process. Hopefully, you're going to choose me or a member of my team. Our goal is to really build a community, and we really want to help guide people through this process and be your realtor for life. You're going to want to know your budget and get pre-approved. This is going to be with the help. I mean, obviously, you need to know what you can actually afford every month. And then you need to stick to your guns on that. If $2,000 a month is all you can afford, then, don't work with somebody that's trying to push you to a payment of $2,500 or $2,800 a month when you can't afford that. So, it is really important that some of that falls on you, but it's also important that your realtor and your loan officer listens to you. But a good realtor is going to have a whole host of loan officers that they can refer you to get you approved for that mortgage loan, so that then you can begin shopping. From there, you're going to decide on the most important 3 to 5 must-haves. I want you to think location, schools, bedrooms and bathrooms. How many bathrooms do you need? How many bedrooms do you need? Do you need a fenced yard? Is there a specific part of town that you want to be in? You and your spouse or significant other, any other decision maker, really needs to come together on this, because if y'all aren't crystal clear on what it is you want, it's going to be very hard to shop for the right home and ultimately purchase the right home. If you both have different lists of wants, that can make this process very, very daunting. Then you're going to start looking at homes. This is the fun part. It really is. All of this other stuff is the work to get here. And that's when you get to go out there, and it's not exactly as exciting as it looks on HGTV, but you're going to actually get to start looking at homes and can decide, could I see myself living here? Is this a place that I'm going to enjoy calling home? If for some reason this happens sometime, You go out and you see 5 or 6 homes, maybe you've been out twice, and you're just not finding anything that you like. It probably is really important for you and your realtor to sit down, at least have a phone conversation, maybe a Zoom or a FaceTime, and just kind of reassess and maybe readjust that criteria. And if your realtor doesn't do this and they're just out there willy-nilly showing you different homes, you need to fire them because they're not working for you. And they also need to be honest with you. You know, unfortunately, sometimes I have to have hard conversations with buyers because they'll tell me what they want, and it is just not realistic in today's market. The other thing that's really important to remember is that your first house is not your dream house. And many times it's a stepping stone to your dream home. You know, if I hadn't have bought that first home that I did, when I did, I wouldn't be in the position I'm in today because that I've just kept reinvesting, you know, and moved every 5 to 8 years. And I've been able to trade up very well without ever having to put any of my own money into it. I've just rolled that all along. So remember, you know, again, we're not trying to find your dream house. We're trying to find a great first place for you to call home. Then you're going to select the home you want to buy. So we go out today and, you know, we look at homes and you see one you really like, then we're going to put an offer on that home. And it may be that you've just gone out one time and you've seen 3 homes, but if you feel like that's the one, you don't need to see 20 more houses because that's the one and you're ready to buy it. Other times you might need to see 20 houses to know which one you want. It's also possible that that first one you liked won't be there anymore by the time you see 20 homes. So you just kind of have to keep all of that in mind. Then you're going to make an offer with the help of your realtor, which will include basically the settlement or we call it the closing date. An offer is an actual legally binding contract. Now, it's not binding till the other side signs, but that's where we list out all your terms. The most important thing being in that, obviously, the purchase price and the closing or settlement date. It typically takes around 30 days if there's a mortgage loan involved to get from the time you go under contract to the closing table. So that would just kind of help you, you know, plan how long this process takes from the time that you buy a house or that you find the house you want. The real estate closing is where you actually go and you sign all the paperwork to make the home yours. So again, we're going to structure that date around a couple different factors. One of those might be if you're renting right now. Let's say that I took you out today and you found the home that you wanted to buy today. Then, you know, we're at January 22nd right now. So more than likely, we would set closing for February 22nd. What that would mean is you always pay your interest and mortgage payment in arrears. So you would not, you close February 22nd, you would not pay a payment on March 1st. Your first payment would be due on April 1st. Well, let's say that you were in you found the home you want today, but your lease was up April 30th. And you're like, oh, Robert, I don't want to double up. No problem. We're close enough to the end of January where we could probably get a seller to accept a closing the first week of March. Well, if you close the first week of March, instead of closing the last week of February, then fast forward to the next month, that's April 1st. You won't pay a mortgage payment then. Your first one would be due May 1st, which would keep you from doubling up. So again, that's one of those things that's super important that we know because we can negotiate that. And I always tell people it's better to start sooner and us have to massage that closing date so that you double up the least amount of time on payments than it be reversed. And you're like, Robert, I need to close by the end of this month. And it's just not, there's just no way to make it happen because we physically don't have enough time to get everything done. This really isn't the kind of process where you want to be rushed. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to deposit your earnest money with the title company. So what is earnest money? Earnest money is your good faith money that says you're not going to walk from this contract for any reason that's not specified in the contract. Don't worry, there'll be several outs. I'm going to talk about those in a minute. But basically what this is typically it's around $1,000 to 1% of the sales price. And it basically is money. Think of it as a deposit. Is you're telling, hey, Mr. Seller, I am not going to back out of this purchase. And if I do, you can have my earnest money unless I back out for a reason that was a valid reason in the contract. But basically, it's the ghost the seller money. If you ghost the seller, then the seller is going to get that money. The next thing is you're going to get the house inspected. Any good realtor is going to be able to recommend numerous home inspectors for you to choose from. What they're actually going to do, it takes typically 2 to 3 hours, depending on the size of the house. They're going to come out there. They're going to inspect everything from the foundation to the roof. They're going to tell you things like how many years they anticipate of useful life you have left in your roof. They're going to tell you if there's any foundational or structural issues. They're also going to look at all of the systems in the home. For instance, your hot water heater, your heating and air conditioning, all your kitchen appliances, your electrical system, your plumbing system. They're going to investigate those as much as they can. And then they're going to give you this beautiful report, some of which is going to just detail out maintenance items that you need to kind of know about when buying that house. You know, one of the things that is super important to understand, especially here in our market, is that most of the time you're not buying a brand new house because we don't have a lot of brand new houses. So there's going to be maintenance involved, and there is a difference between maintenance and things that need to be repaired by the seller that the seller, hasn't done, or that's deferred maintenance or something like that. Now, let's say that something went wrong. You know how I talked about previously, you could get your earnest money back if for a specified reason in the contract. This would be one of those times. Let's say you go into the house, we do the inspection, the report comes back, and there's just stuff you can't live with. Then you could get out of that contract. The other thing is you could negotiate that the seller makes some repairs. So let me give you some examples here. So I had a client recently who was under contract, and we went to the home inspection, and several of the kitchen appliances weren't working. That's really not a big deal because any seller should be willing to fix those items, short of it being a strictly as-is sale. So sure enough, we typed up the repair addendum, sent it over. They agreed to fix all of the issues. They weren't even aware of it. Recently, just had another client who unfortunately we did have to release. If you see this photo here of those big cracks in the foundation wall, well, that was only the beginning. Cracks in a foundation wall are not the end of the world. It just really depends on if it is caused structural problems or not. Sometimes it can just be surface, and that's something the inspector will look for. And then sometimes, in this case, this house was so bad up underneath it that the home inspector recommended an evaluation by a structural engineer. And he estimated that the cost would be upwards of $10,000 or more to repair the foundation. So my buyer, she just decided to release from that contract. She got her earnest money back, and we moved on. We're back out there looking at houses right now because that just really is way too much for her to take on. So multiple things can happen there. Ideally, this doesn't happen, but if it does, no harm, no foul. We just move on. The next thing that's going to happen, and you're actually not going to be doing this. This is something that the realtors are going to do behind the scenes. We're going to get the house inspected for termites and moisture related damage. I like to tell everybody, every house in Hampton Roads has either had termite or moisture damage, or it's going to get it. We have a very high moisture content in our soil. And there just is, unfortunately, there's a lot of termites, and there is a lot of wood destroying fungus that's just exists here. So we're going to get that done. And because the mortgage company is going to require that you have a clear termite and moisture letter, which basically means that there's no signs of any termite infestation. If there has been, that a treatment is done. If any repairs are needed, that the repairs have been made, and the same with moisture. So that basically is what the termite and moisture inspection will be about. Is a guy's going to suit up, he's going to go down in the crawl space, he's going to take a bunch of moisture readings, he's going to take it's a tool similar to a screwdriver, and he's going to, poke at anything that looks wet or looks like it's had damage to it, and ensure that it's, the structure of the house is good and hasn't been destroyed by termites. The next thing, this photo is really realistic, other than the fact that today we do almost everything electronically. This is going to be the absolute worst part of your home buying process, is getting all of these documents together. It is just a lot of work. Unfortunately, it just is what it is. It's a lot of stuff to get together. They're going to ask you for everything. You're going to feel like they've even asked you for your firstborn, and a blood signature. It just is what it takes to buy a home. Any deposit that's been made into an account, they're going to want to source. So, I just like to put that out there. Just understand, if they ask for something, unfortunately, you got to get it to them or they're going to deny the loan. Let's talk about some things, some do's and don'ts during the process once you're under contract. You do want to monitor your credit, budget wisely, keep your emergency fund, prioritize your existing debt. One of the things you do not want to do, you do not want to open any new credit cards. You want to postpone all your major purchases, resist any retail store credit card offers. I know they push them down people's throat. And you want to limit credit inquiries. I had a situation, unfortunately, it's probably been 3 years ago now, where fortunately we're able to get everything handled and the buyer was able to still close on their house, but they got, kind of shopping happy after they went under contract, despite being told not to do this. And they bought, it was like a 6-month same as cash deal at a furniture store, and they bought all the furniture for the house that they had not closed on yet. Well, the mortgage company always is going to pull your credit right before closing. And unfortunately, right before closing, that showed up, and that payment pushed them to disqualify from that loan. Now, he was able to go back to the store. I don't know what he did, but he was able to cancel the order. He probably bought the stuff after closing, but they worked with him and he was still able to close. But you don't want to do that. I've heard horror stories. Fortunately, it's never happened to me, but I heard a story one time of somebody that couldn't buy because, they had been told that they couldn't buy a new car. So they decided to lease one. Well, unfortunately, that lease payment is the same as a car payment. It's now on your credit report. They could no longer buy the home that they had wanted to buy. So really, you just don't want to do anything that's going to impact your credit. And if you have any questions, you just ask your loan officer. The next in this process is you're going to go to walkthrough. So what's a walkthrough? A walkthrough is where you're going to walk through the house with your realtor. I'm going to, if you're using me or a member of my team, we have a wonderful checklist where you're going to go through and you're going to check off everything. And you're going to ensure that that house, that all of your major systems are working and that the house is in the same condition that it was in when you went under contract. And from there, this will either be done the day before closing or the day after closing. And that really is up to your schedule and the realtor's schedule. We always like to do these during daylight. So sometimes we do them right before closing because, if you couldn't get off work early enough the day before, until it's dark, then we probably want to do it the day of closing. Sometimes we just have to do it the day of closing because the seller is moving out, down at the wire the day before closing. So lots of times it will be kind of right before closing. The only time I really discourage that is if we did have a laundry list of repairs that we had asked the seller to make, because in that case, we want to make sure that all of those repairs were done prior to you being excited about going to the closing table in half an hour. So when you go to closing, I already talked a little bit about what closing is. That's when you're going to sign all the documents. This is the most exciting day of your homeownership journey. because once you finish signing all those documents, you get the keys to the house and you get to move in. That house is yours and it is time to celebrate. After this, ideally, you're going to leave your realtor a 5-star review and you're going to refer all your family and friends because they did a fantastic job for you and you're going to be happy for years to come in that house. So what does today's real estate market look like? So our median sales price of single family homes over the past 12 months, as you can see, has hovered from around 350,000. It went all the way up to 4. And right now today, it's at about $389,000. So as you can see, it's not getting any cheaper. So there's really no benefit to waiting unless that makes sense for you, just because unfortunately, home prices just continue to rise. Let's also talk about days on market. So as you can see, we had the highest days on market a year ago in January. And last May, we were down below 10 days on market. And now we're trending back up. We're a little over 20 days right now, which is about 3 weeks. With that being said, I would say that you can expect that to kind of trail off as we get closer to spring and as interest rates continue to come down, because that's just as we go into spring, like we saw last May, that time came, days on market came down. So what does this really mean to you as a buyer? It means that, number one, if you see a house that you like, you probably want to go see it and not be like, oh, well, maybe I'll do it next week or the week after, because it probably won't be there next week or the week after if it's a good house. The other thing is, if it is day one on the market, like I was talking about settlement expenses before, you're probably not going to be able to get the seller to pay those. But when you get up here to where you're over 20 days on the market, there's a good possibility that you would be able to get the seller to cover some or all of those closing costs, because they're starting to get nervous that their house isn't going to sell, or that they're going to have to reduce the sales price. Just remember, a reduction in sales price is almost the same as asking for closing cost assistance. If you ask for $10,000 towards your closing cost, that's almost the same as buying the house for $10,000 less when it comes to the seller's net. So you're probably not going to get $10,000 off and $10,000 in closing cost assistance, because that's like a reduction from the seller's pocket of like $20,000. That's a lot of money. So let's talk about what's a buyer's market versus a seller's market. You've probably heard, if you're listening to news media and everything else, that it's a seller's market. Well, what that truly means is, let's talk about a balanced market. A balanced market is when there's about 6 months of inventory on the market. Right now in Hampton Roads, we have just under 2 months of inventory on the market. So as you can see, there's not over 6 months of inventory that would make it a buyer's market. So in a seller's market, basically you have more buyers in the market than you have homes on the market. And in a buyer's market, you have less buyers in the market than, wait, I'm saying that wrong. You have more homes on the market than buyers. So therefore, sellers are nervous because there aren't as many buyers out there to buy their home, and they know that every buyer has 5 homes to pick from. We haven't seen a market like that in almost 8 years in Hampton Roads. We have seen a very strong seller's market for about the past 5 years. And what that means is that every seller knows that if you don't buy their house, there is at least 2 or 3 other buyers out there that want their house. So they don't have to negotiate as much. So let's talk about what's the role of a realtor in all of this. How do you choose a realtor? Does it matter if your realtor is full-time or part-time? So how you're going to choose a realtor is, number one, somebody you like, because this is the biggest financial investment of your life. If you don't enjoy working with this person, ideally it's myself or a member of my team. But if you don't jive, then it's not going to be a good process and you're not going to enjoy it. This is supposed to be a super exciting process for you. The other thing you want to know is, how confident are you in their ability? Does it sound like they're a professional? Does it sound like they do this full time? Because, and I'm not taking anything away from somebody that does this part-time. However, if, you know, this isn't their full-time occupation, how much time do they have to spend studying the market? How much do they really know what's going on? Because again, this is one of the biggest financial investments you're going to make of your life. And you want to make sure you really trust that person and that they are a true professional and really know what they're doing and that they're going to be able to advocate on your behalf. So this is always a question I get. Every first-time buyer I meet with wants to know how I get paid. So let's talk about how your realtor gets paid. The majority of the time, I can't say all, but the majority of the time, the seller is going to offer as part of their marketing that they will pay not only the agent that markets the property, known as the listing agent, but that they will also pay the buyer's agent, the agent that represents you as the buyer. They do that because they know that then they're hiring essentially all 10,000 agents in, that are members of our local multiple listing service here to help sell their house, because otherwise they're counting on that person to get their person to pay them, and they know that that's really working against them. And at the end of the day, ultimately, you're the one that's paying everybody, because without a buyer buying that house with either cash or a mortgage, there's no money to pay the seller and pay the agents that are involved. I always tell people too, in the unlikely event that we come across a house, maybe it's a for sale by owner, or maybe it's one that just isn't offering compensation to a buyer's agent, I am going to tell you that up front. And still, 90% of the time, I will be able to negotiate that in the contract for the seller to pay it the same way that we can negotiate to get other concessions paid. So that's really not something you have to worry about. Again, if you're dealing with somebody really good, they're going to be 100% transparent with you about all this and how they get paid. And they're going to tell you if there's any chance at all that they're not going to get paid and you're going to have to pay them. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all for coming. I hope you got something from it, and feel free to reach out.